What is the real cost of college? Colleges call it COA, Cost of Attendance. But what does cost of attendance include? It's an approximate cost of tuition and fees, books and school supplies, housing and food, transportation, and personal expenses. All of these are estimated costs to your students' yearly cost of attendance to attend that college or university. Now, this is truly an estimated cost of a 10-month period. So for schools that are on a semester program, that is August to May, and schools that are on a quarterly program, that is September through June. Now, it's important to remember this is an estimated cost. It is not the true cost of attendance. There's multiple variables that go into these costs that may increase the prices of some things or decrease them. So let's break down each section of what cost of attendance includes and talk about different ways that the cost may fluctuate. Tuition and fees. Tuition and fees are based on the number of credit hours or units your student is taking. Now, for a typical undergrad student, 12 units is considered full-time enrollment. So tuition is often broken down into two categories: 0 to 6 units, which means you are less than half-time. There's one cost for that. Or if you're 6.1 units and above, there's a cost for that breakdown, which is half-time and above. There are also adjustments to tuition if your student is considered an out-of-state student, and that means that they do not have a residential address in the state that the college is in. So for example, if your home state is Nevada, and that is where your student has their driver's license, that is their established home base, but they are wanting to attend a school in Oregon, they will be paying out-of-state tuition to attend that university until they can establish residency in that state. Some schools do have programs that your student can apply for if they are paying out-of-state tuition to help lower those costs. One example of this is the Western Undergraduate Exchange Program. Now, depending on your student's school and their home-based state, they could apply to this program to potentially get their tuition lowered. Now, it depends on the states and it depends on the schools that participate in the program, but it is an option to apply for to potentially have a lower tuition cost. Now, that does not mean that their tuition is lowered all the way to what an in-state student is paying, but it is much less than what they'd be paying for out-of-state. From my experience, out-of-state tuition is almost double what an in-state student is paying. So when you and your student are deciding on what college or university for them to attend, that is something very important for you all to take into consideration. What will that out-of-state tuition cost be? Is there a way for you to petition the university to get it waived? Is there a way to apply for certain programs like the Western Undergraduate Exchange Program to be able to reduce that cost and get it lowered? Are there other options for establishing residency? Are students able to apply for residency once they've lived in that state for a year? Which that will depend on the state rules. Is your student able to defer going to school for a year and establish residency in that state and then be able to pay in-state tuition? Lots of different options, lots of research to do based on the school and the state. Tuition will often also be higher if you are considered an international student. So if you're a student that is coming from outside the U.S. to his college in the U.S., typically you have a higher tuition rate that you'll be paying. Now, there are also programs and scholarship opportunities international students can apply for to lower their tuition. It's typically not going to get down to the same rate that in-state students would be paying. Now, that was about tuition. Let's talk about fees. Fees are dependent on your campus and what was ever approved by their campus fee board. But they also are dependent on what type of classes your student takes. If your student takes specific classes that have extra fees associated to them, those will be tacked on. One example of that is art classes. Sometimes there's an extra fee tacked on for your student to pay, whether that is for the supplies or for the maintenance of the area. A great example of this is glass blowing. It takes a lot to keep that program going, and so there could be associated fees with your student taking that class to be able just to maintain the space because it's pretty costly. A second example is sciences and labs. Sometimes labs and science classes cost a bit more because there's a lot of materials that are utilized during class time that need to be readily available and not reliant on the student to bring them to class. So there may be those additional fees added on to be able to make sure we have those supplies in the classroom. Now, outside of fees that are for specific classes that your student enrolls in, there are the general campus fees that were approved by the campus fee board. Now, most of these are fees that your student is not able to opt out of, but they are also extremely important for keeping a campus running. Now, these fees could include a student union fee, so keeping up the student union building. It could have a student government fee, so maintaining the student governing body. There could be a fee for the rec center, so the gym. There could be a fee for athletics, so to keep the athletic teams funded. There can be a fee for campus ID cards because most schools, their student needs to have an ID card to use many of the resources. And there also can be a student learning fee. Now, student learning fees are extremely important, and sometimes they're the highest fee within those campus fees. But let me break down for you what student learning fees do. Student learning fees are what pay for many of the extras that are involved on a campus. They can be paying for clubs on campus, they can be paying for travel to conferences and experiences students get to attend, they can be paying for special courses, and they can be paying for support programs on campus. For example, there might be rolled into all those fees one that covers adding extra funding to the Student Learning Center, so the area where students can go and get tutoring for a wider range of classes. Since there's so many classes on a college campus, you need a lot of tutors to be able to help those students. So there's going to be a higher cost, and so sometimes those fees are able to help support those areas' budget to be able to provide those services to students. Our next area is books and supplies. So this area is very much tailored to your students' preferences and their major. Depending on your student's major, they may have more books that they may need to utilize for their college education than in other areas. So for example, from my experience, I have seen that many students who are studying in the science realm, like nursing, chemistry, many times they have a lot more textbooks than a student who is studying generalized business. It just depends on the student's major and what is required. Also, depending on the major, there may be a requirement for certain materials like a laptop. Many engineering programs or interior architecture programs require students to have a specific laptop and purchase specific programs to put on those laptops. So it's something to keep in mind if you're going to be buying your student a laptop for school, that they may, depending on their major, need something a little bit extra than a standard Google Chromebook or a standard regular Dell computer. Really check out the department website to see if there's any specialized requirements that they need for their program before you make any of those large purchases. Another factor going into books and supplies is the type of books. Now, depending on how your student learns and their classes, the fees differentiate on how much those books and supplies are going to cost. Now, I want you to remember that typically an actual physical book costs more than an ebook does. But depending on your student's learning style and if they need to have access to that book in class, that may factor into the decision making of which one you're going to choose and purchase. Now, I know specifically for me, back when I was an undergrad, ebooks weren't a thing yet, but I loved having a physical book. It was nice to be able to have it, to read it just like I did in high school. But for many students, they're able to get by with e-readers. Now there's so many different formats and different programs you can use that allow them to highlight and take notes that digital versions of books can be an option. Now, for getting physical books, there are many different ways to lower the costs. One of the big ways is to shop around. Now, I personally love a website, and I am not sponsored by this website at all, is cheapesttextbooks.com. I use this throughout my entire undergrad and graduate program to find the best prices for books. Now, what I love with this website is you will type in the ISBN number for the book, so on your student's syllabus, the faculty member will supply that ISBN number so your student is able to make sure they get the right textbook. With this website, you can put in that ISBN and it will search the internet and combine for you in one location all the options for purchasing the book new, purchasing the book used, or renting the book. Now, I love this because I was able to decide based on my classes and the options what was right for me. For some classes that were core classes to my major, it was better for me to buy the book and know that I would have that and I'll probably reference it in future classes. With more general education courses or courses where I was like, I'm probably not going to use this information later, I can just Google it, I could rent the book. What was nice is getting all those options in one place and not having to search everywhere. Besides that website, Chegg and Amazon also offer opportunities to purchase books or to rent books. So there's other areas for you to look into for renting or purchasing options. One final note about textbooks. Now, for many colleges and universities, they have a policy that if a textbook is required for class, that the faculty must put a copy of that book in the library for students to check out. Now, this does not mean that your student can go check it out, take it home, and have it the rest of the semester or quarter. This is a book that is on loan specifically to just stay in the library, and students are usually able to check it out for 2 to 3 hours at a time. So if they need it right away to do their homework, they need it for studying, but they don't have the actual book or access to the book yet, they could utilize that as an option. So when our students first start the semester, many times faculty are not requiring them to have their book on day one. They're going to talk about it in the first few class sessions. If the faculty does require homework right away, your student needs to be able to reference the book and they're waiting on it to come through the mail. Oftentimes there's going to be one at the library in circulation for them to check out for a few hours while they stay at the library and get their homework done. So there should not be any stress about how long that book takes to come in, because there should be an option at the library to be able to check it out and get access to it. The next section is housing. Now, housing cost is going to range by where your student lives. Is your student living at home with you and commuting? Are they living in the dorms? Are they living in an apartment or rented house? Are they sharing their bedroom with someone? Those costs are going to vary depending on your student's situation. A great way to lower the cost if your student is living off campus in an apartment or house is for them to share their bedroom, if that's allowed by the leasing company. Now, one of my cousins did this 3 to 4 years of her undergrad experience. She met one of her best friends in the dorms, and then for the next 3 years, they shared a bedroom. Now, was that always probably the most convenient for them? No, but they were then spending half of the rent they normally would be if they had their own private room. So it made it much more cost effective for them as they went through school. And hey, you're not always going to be in your room, so sharing is not the end of the world. Now on the other side, if your student is going to live in the dorms, really think about the types of rooms that you're able to apply for. Many schools are going to have multiple options, from single rooms, which are the most expensive, and truly, in my opinion, not worth the money because they end up usually being very tiny. There'll be double rooms where your student would have 1 roommate, triple rooms where they may have 2 more roommates, and quad rooms where they may have 3 additional roommates. Now, some of those situations can be overwhelming for your student, but I want you to remember that the more people live in a room, the less expensive it is. And students do not live in their rooms 24/7 at college. Their room is often really a place for them to sleep and change. They're going to be out and about with friends. There's different areas, whether that is in the dorms to study or the library or different places on campus. They are not living in their room 24/7. So it's really important to research those options and see about the cost effectiveness. At the end of the day, some of the best advice that I got from one of my mentors was you can do anything for a year. Really think about that. In the dorms, your student's only there typically for about 10 months. They can survive being in a situation with multiple roommates for 10 months. And then maybe the following year you have in your budget for them to have their own room at an off-campus apartment. It is possible to make it work. Your student just has to learn to get out of their dorm room to find those spaces, whether it's hanging out with friends in a common space, whether it's doing their homework at the library or somewhere else around campus. There's always great hidden study spots around campus that are outside of the library. Really, it's just making it work because the cost saving is huge. You can go from paying $14,000 for a double room to paying $8,000 for a quad. That can be a big price difference and something really to consider. Also, at some schools, there's special rooms. Now, one of the schools I worked for, we had what we called small double rooms. Now, these rooms were pretty small. They were definitely smaller than a standard size double room. Most of them had pillars in them that took up a lot of the floor space. But what was nice for those is students only paid the triple rate for a double room. So they had 1 other roommate, but they were paying what they would have been paying if they had 2 roommates. Now I saw many students complain about this because they're like, our room is tiny. But really, when you look back at it, the square footage of your room doesn't matter, and the cost savings they got while only having 1 roommate was a fantastic way to save money on housing in college. So really look at all your students' options. Are they able to share a bedroom with someone if they live off campus? Are they able to have multiple roommates if they're living in the dorms, if there are those options? If your student is dead set on a single, are they going to make up the difference for that expense? Because single rooms are typically way more expensive. Or are they going to learn to deal with a double? Now, it can be really challenging for students who have never had a roommate before. I know for me personally, I always had my own bedroom because growing up, it was just me and my brother, and we had our own spaces. So freshman year, learning to live with somebody in my bedroom was an uphill battle and very challenging. But now, a couple decades later, we're best friends and we're maid of honors in each other's weddings. It is possible. It's just going to be a learning experience for your student. Those first few weeks may be full of a few rough bumps, but it'll all work out in the end. If your student is wanting to save money on housing for college, they really need to look into those options because the housing cost does add up quickly. Our next section is food. Now, food cost is really going to vary by student. This is going to depend on your student's eating habits, if they have a meal plan for campus, whether that is an on-campus living situation where they have a meal plan attached to their dorm. There's options to purchase a meal plan if a student is living off campus, and depends on how much they're utilizing their resources or eating out versus cooking at home in their apartment or house. Now, a few things that can help food budgets. First thing to always think about is most colleges and universities have a student food pantry that all students are able to use regardless of socioeconomic status. All they need to do usually is to come during the open hours with their student ID, present their student ID, and then they're able to pick up to a certain amount of items. Now, what's fantastic about this is the student ID is being used to track how many students are actually utilizing the resource, so funding keeps going to that resource. But also, there's going to be tons of products for them to use to add to their meal plan for the week. Whether that is staple pantry items like pasta, rice, and sauces and soups, or is that more items that are not shelf stable like eggs and fresh produce? It all depends on how your student utilizes that resource. Now, I know at many of the colleges I've worked at, they've had contracts with local companies and local farms to be able to provide produce, bread, and other local materials and food supplies to students through that food pantry. So it's a great option to be able to also be eating local if they have those type of contracts. The other amazing thing about the on-campus food pantries is typically they have other supplies for students as well. They'll typically have menstrual products, they'll sometimes have hygiene supplies, so shampoo, conditioner, and many are now starting to add an addition of diapers. So if your student has a young child that's still in diapers, many of those food pantries are now providing that as a service where your student is able to get diapers for their little one. Now, typically the department that runs the food pantry also has resources to help your student apply for food stamps. Now, there may be some stigma for you and your student around that, but it is a great resource for your student to attempt to apply to be able to supplement their food costs. So it's something to really look into. They have individuals at most of these departments who will sit down with your student, go through the application together, help them actually apply, and give them the correct information. Now, every student situation is different, everybody's financials are different, but it's a great option to be able to help them pay for groceries while they're at college. I do recommend sitting down with your student and talking through a budget of what their grocery bills are going to be and what their eating out budget is going to be. It's really easy for students to fall into just purchasing things on campus. So if a student lives off campus and they come for maybe 2 classes that day, it's so easy and so convenient just to go to the on-campus store to get a snack, to get a drink. But those prices are usually a little inflated and they add up quickly. If your students plan ahead and bring their own drinks and snacks to campus to have in between classes, that can save them a lot of money each year. It's also important in the food budget discussion to discuss with your student how many times they are going to be cooking their own meals each week. Doing DoorDash, Uber Eats, eating out, that adds up so quickly, especially right now with inflation. Just getting a simple meal is way more expensive than it used to be. But eating at home, whether they're utilizing the food pantry, food stamps, or just their general grocery budget, they are going to save so much money by making their food and eating at home than they would be by eating out or DoorDashing something. Now, on the opposite side, if your student is living in the dorms and has a meal plan, I want you to have this mentality. Your student needs to use their meal plan because you both already paid for all those meals. And if they don't utilize their meal plan, you're throwing money on the ground. Now, it's really easy to get sick and tired of the dining hall. It's very easy to not want to eat there and rather go out and eat with friends or DoorDash something. But you and your student have already paid for all this food, so they need to be utilizing their resources. Now, a great tip I have is to make sure you both fully understand what is included in their meal plan. So a great example is that many schools now, they will have where you have meal swipes, so swipes that your student can use in the dining hall or other food locations on campus. And then they'll have some sort of like flex cash that be used around campus at more like the convenient type stores. Those are important for your student to know and know where to utilize those types of funding. Really, if you think about it, your student has about 12 meals a week maybe, and they also have that extra flexi cash, maybe it's about $15 a week. They need to be utilizing as much as they can because you have already paid for it. So knowing what their options are will make a big difference. Now with a dining hall, many are all-you-can-eat buffet types, and it's really tiresome to be eating in there. You'll be like, oh, there's the pasta station, the pizza station, the main station, the burger station. But your student needs to think about they don't just have to take what is plated for them. They can also ask for just certain elements. I had a friend that anytime we ate in dining, he would come back with meals where all of us were like, where did you get that? He would go to the different stations and ask for specific things at each area and make his own meal. It's important for your student to remember that they don't need to just accept the plated plates that are usually put out. They can ask this station for their rice, this station for some salad, this station for a protein, and make their own meal. This will really help them switch it up, make eating at dining hall not as tiresome and them getting bored of it by switching up and making their own meals within there. Now another option that I had a few friends do is they would utilize their swipes a lot. So they had a plan all the time on days where they did not have classes, where they would swipe in the morning, they would eat breakfast, they'd study and doing their homework in the dining hall, and then they would eat lunch once lunch was put out. Now depending on your campus's policies and dining hall hours, it is possible sometimes to use one meal swipe and get 2 meals. Some students do use all their meal swipes and some do not. It just depends on your student. But really, dining meal plans are not designed for your student to eat 3 meals a day. So your student may need to get creative if they actually are going to utilize their full meal plan. Now this also circles back to a great opportunity to use the campus food pantry and other resources. So sometimes they could have breakfast or a meal in their room or utilize some of their flex cash versus using their meal swipes. So they're able to really spread those out throughout the week and use them appropriately. Now a task you and your students can easily do before they even go to college is to call local businesses or look up on their websites if they provide discounts to students. Sometimes small businesses and local establishments will have student deals. So for example, one of the pizza shops real close to where I used to work had a student special, so for lunch they could get a sliced pizza and a soda for much cheaper than they would be just buying those individually. Also, sometimes grocery stores have discounts. So for example, Safeway and Raley's typically have a student discount if a student provides their ID at checkout. Now the grocery employee is not going to ask, oh, hey, are you a student? Because they don't want to assume. It's up to your student to be the one to be like, hey, here's my student ID for my discount. So there's some easy phone calls or checking websites your students can make to see about those deals ahead of time. A lot of places surrounding colleges will have different deals, but it's up to your student to ask about it and to remind them when checking out to be able to get those discounts. Now I do want you to be realistic when planning a food budget with your student that the first few weeks of school are typically when your student is going to spend the most money. Now for brand new students to university, especially if they're moving into the dorms, this can be because they're making friends, and the easiest way to make friends is to go get coffee with people, to go eat out together. So sometimes you're going to be spending more to make those friend groups, but also getting into a new routine. Sometimes students have not found that exact routine yet, and so those first few weeks they might be eating on campus, utilizing cafes or coffee shops more than they normally would. So be realistic with the budget, pad those first few weeks to make sure you're not going to have them overspend accidentally. Our next section is transportation. Now transportation is really going to depend on your student and their living situation. Are they commuting to college? Are they living on campus? Are they living off campus and riding their bike? Are they driving their car? Are they purchasing an on-campus permit? Are they going to park around the school, whether that's in free parking areas or metered parking areas? It all just depends on you and your student situation. But I want you to be aware of a lot of the hidden costs that come with transportation for college students. Now, I can tell you for sure over all the years I've worked at colleges that many first-year students will want to bring their car to campus. But a lot of times the dorms don't have enough parking for everybody, and also those permits can be expensive. So something to think about, can your students survive without it? Many universities will provide transportation that students can sign up for and maybe have a small fee, whether that's to get to a local airport or there's other local transportation they can take when they're wanting to travel home for different holidays or different events. Now, with actually having your car on campus, a few costs to think about. You need to think about insurance. Depending on your auto policy, you may have to update the address, which may adjust the cost for your auto insurance. That's something most people don't think about, but your student, if they get hit, if their car gets broken into while they're away at college and you report a claim and it's not for the area they typically live in, those could raise some questions, so something to think about. Parking permits. Now, if your student brings their car to college and they live in the dorms, and for many schools win a parking lottery, they're gonna have to pay for a permit. And those permits are usually pretty pricey and often have to be repurchased more than once per academic year. So on semester schools, they'll typically have a fall permit and a spring permit. So your student has to make sure that they're purchasing the fall permit on time and then purchasing their spring permit on time, or they could lose their parking spot. And that includes students who are driving to campus. There's often parking passes they need to purchase, and with off-campus students driving to campus, typically those parking permits are not guaranteed parking. They're not selling 100 permits for 100 parking spaces. They are selling maybe 200 permits to students for 100 parking spaces. Because not all students are going to be there 24 hours a day, but there's no guarantee for parking. With that extra cost could be your students circling the parking lots to find a spot. It could be your student having to leave the campus much earlier to find a parking spot. I know when I was in school, sometimes I would get to campus right before 8 a.m., even though my class wasn't until 11, and study and do homework on campus. That way I had a parking spot, because the later the day got, the harder it was to find a parking spot on our campus because everyone wanted to take their classes more so in the afternoon. Something to think about, because that does cost your students time. And then also sometimes circulating the parking lot is going to cost you gas money. Now let's talk about parking permits. I have seen them range on many different price levels. Some schools, parking permits are maybe $50 per semester or quarter. In some schools, they're maybe $300-400 per semester or per quarter. It just depends on the school and their parking situation. So research that cost before your student really decides if they want to try to bring a car to campus, because that can add up very quickly. And like I said earlier, sometimes there's specific deadlines for students to renew parking permits. And if they don't renew their parking permit on time, they'll lose it and it goes to another person. Now, some less expensive options are your student being able to bike to campus if they live off campus, or use a scooter, walking, and many schools actually make deals with the local busing system. And so students can ride the local bus for free with their student ID. That is something that is fantastic to look into, because it's not just about your student going to campus to take class, but also be for going different places in town, whether that's the grocery store, the mall, movies, different places downtown. Really look into that, because your student could save a lot of money on Uber or other opportunities by taking the local bus and utilizing that system. Regardless of what your student chooses, make sure you all talk through all of the costs that can be potentially there. Talk about if they're bringing a car, permits, insurance, gas, their time for trying to find a parking spot. Even parking off campus sometimes can take a few minutes to be able to find a spot that's close enough to campus, or they're going to be parking away from campus and they're going to have to walk into actual campus, which could take 10-15 minutes to happen. Now also, just knowing the other resources. Most colleges will have, if you type into their search engine, transportation, opportunities for students to use the local bus, student resources for if they are a big campus and they need to get from one end to the other in the middle of the night. There's different options, so make sure you're exploring all opportunities to really save your money. Now, the final section in cost of attendance is personal expenses. And these are expenses that, just like the name, are personal. They're going to depend on your student and your student's hobbies or habits. If your student has expensive hobbies where they need to buy a lot of supplies consistently or go utilize different facilities, those are going to add up. Just like adding in beauty supplies, self-care routines, those can add up as well. So really with your student, what I recommend is prior to them going to school, take a few weeks of budget of what they spent maybe for all of June and just sit through and look at what is the cost of doing their sports, their hobbies, their activities, their self-care. Really try to get an idea of how much they're spending and what areas could they maybe trim back on if needed. Do they need to get their nails done every couple weeks? Do they need to buy their pass to go hunting this season when they're going to be at college and they're not going to be able to bring all of their hunting materials to campus typically? Really think through those different expenses that they have, and are there other areas you can trim back? Do they need to buy the super expensive shampoo? Could they buy a cheaper body wash? All of those little things do add up, but it also depends on your student. So let's review. Cost of attendance is not a bill. It is an estimated cost of what it will cost for your student to be at college for 10 months. Semester schools, that is August to May. Quarterly schools, September to June. Now this includes everything that we've talked about. Tuition and fees, housing, food, transportation, and personal expenses. There are so many ways for you and your student to lower the cost of these items, but it's really up to you to research those opportunities and your student truly to take advantage of them. There may be some stigma about utilizing some of these resources, but at the end of the day, your student walking away with less debt from college is what's going to make the difference for their adult life. Now, before your student is even planning to apply to different colleges or attend college, research what their cost of attendance is. And you can easily do that by going to any college website and using the search function to either type in cost of attendance or type in COA, and that will give you an estimate. Now that estimate changes year over year as tuition changes, as inflation changes, and they'll give you different examples based on if your student's living in the dorms, if your student's living off campus with family or off campus with other students. Many schools try to give you tons of different ranges so you can get a good idea of what it will cost your student. But remember, cost of attendance is an estimate. You and your student can make different decisions to change that price tag. Remember, no matter what that price tag is, there's different ways for your student to pay for college. By applying to financial aid through completing their FAFSA, they can utilize that for paying tuition fees and some other expenses depending on their package and what they're eligible for. There's scholarships your student can apply for, which I highly recommend they apply to their college's scholarship application every year, every single year. It changes every year, more money every year, every year. Also, your student's budget is going to change based on them living on campus, off campus, sharing a room, living at home, transportation cost decisions. It's really possible to make it work. Your student also can work while going to school or work during the holiday breaks or summer to be able to provide for some of that budget throughout the academic year. There's numerous ways to make it work. And at the end of the day, worst case scenario, your student takes out some student loans, which no one wants to do and no one wants to pay those back. But an education is extremely important. And if that's important to you and your student, there are ways to make this possible. So always look up those different exceptions, look up those different discounts, really get to know what your students' options are to make this as most affordable as possible. Alright y'all, so that was the overview of cost of attendance, COA, your estimated cost for your student to attend their college or university. If you have any questions about cost of attendance or any questions about college life, scholarships, dorm life in general, please feel free to leave comments below and I will do my best to answer those questions there or to create a future video about them. If you have any tips or tricks for other parents that you'd like to share, please also add them to those comments below. If you'd like more content with different tips and tricks about scholarships, dorm life, college, supporting your student, please feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel by hitting the subscribe button below and liking the video. I'm here to be a resource for you, so please feel free to ask questions and utilize me to help you support your student on their college journey.